to further ask questions about YYC. So Calgary Airport Authority is actually representative of, I believe, 7% of the GDP of Calgary. It is very important to the economy of Calgary. And recently, the Aero-Mexico flight between Calgary and Mexico City, I believe it's been cancelled. And this flight was just announced last year, and I believe there was some investment on the part of the government to attracting that particular flight to Calgary. And I'm wondering if we have any numbers as to how much was invested and what's happened to the flight. If it's gone, I think there might be a code share with WestJet now, but would it not have been a little bit less expensive to just deal directly with WestJet to begin with?
So this is news to me if there was a direct economic investment from the government of Alberta into this flight. I know that through our office, our international offices, and the work that EDT does, we're constantly trying to promote flights. And so I'll call on Matt if he has more information. And I believe that flight actually is still in service.
I think they did cancel the service.
The last plane was this week. So I belong to the YYC Plane Spotters group, which is kind of nerdy, but I get a lot of good information. And one of them was the last picture of the Aero-Mexico flight leaving YYC this week.
So through our international, we've got an international office in Mexico City, and both the local engaged staff and our managing director are very supportive and working with Mexico on trying to promote that back to Alberta. But we're for sure there nothing that I'm aware of any financial incentives that we're providing.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. I want to move on to your digital media tax credit. So that honestly, it seems like there's only one company that's going to benefit from it. I'm sure there are others, but if you could provide that information. And I wonder if there was any consideration of expanding it. Digital media certainly has a lot of overlap with diagnostic imaging, with medical imaging, GIS, geotechnical imaging, and engineering visualizations. So was there any thought put into expanding that particular tax credit into those areas? Because it seems like a lot of eggs are in one basket there with that particular tax credit.
So the interactive digital media tax credit is not just applicable to the gaming industry. It's also for interactive educational design of software. So there are more applications than just interactive games. But what I can tell you is that there are a number of companies in Alberta, including Beamdog and others, that were at the announcement who have been asking for this. So, I want to be clear on the record. This is not a tax credit that was created for BioWare. This was a tax credit. And actually what excites BioWare is the companies that will now be popping up in the province, as well as companies that are going to be attracted to us. So Beamdog is one, Sirius Labs is another, Code Hatch is another. There's a number of companies that are very, very excited at the interactive digital media tax credit.
So I'm just going to move on to my next question.
Sure, yep.
It's regarding the same tax credit. There is possibly some sort of conflict with NAFTA, so that the tax credit could be considered a subsidy, and that would render the tax credit moot. It would render it null and void. And there has been some news about this. It was last summer, frankly, but there are concerns from the U.S. that represents an unfair trade advantage for Canada, and I wonder if that was taken into consideration, or if the department understands what the risks might be.
Sure. Well, no, I mean, obviously whenever we're looking at programs, especially in EDT, because trade is in this department. And so, the program that designed the digital media tax credit is a different division than our trade and investment. But believe me, they're down the hall from each other. So there are conversations that take place. As far as a number of our programs, we do look at and try to roll out programs that are trade compliant. This program is based on programs that exist in other jurisdictions of Canada, so British Columbia, Quebec, and so. What I can say is that we look to ensure that we are trade compliant because it is important. But at the same time, we're also looking at programs that will support Alberta companies.
With NAFTA being under negotiation right now, I think it would probably be worth the time to take a look and just see if that is something that is on the negotiating table right now. It would be unfortunate to put that much work in and then have it nullified by NAFTA.
So I was just informed, member, that it's not being discussed at NAFTA at all.
It's not?
No.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
And at one point, if I can, and I'm sorry, Member McPherson, I just wanted to clarify. So earlier information that I gave is actually inaccurate.
Okay.
On the investor tax credit time frame, I had said 30 days. Well, there's a number of steps that have to take place when a company applies to the investor tax credit. One, the approving the registration application is down to 30 days. But the whole process now, is this the total?
No, it's about 7 months.
The total of the investor tax credit is roughly 7 months from the time they apply. Now, having said that, I just want to clarify that part of it depends on the company and how quickly they move as they move through the process of applying for it. There was, again, as you mentioned earlier, and I stated, there was a bit of a backlog in the beginning for sure.
Yeah.
We're constantly looking at ways to reduce that so that companies can get the approval and then go out and raise equity.
Okay, thanks for that. I appreciate it. Again, back to the digital media tax credit. Do you have a sense, and this is similar to the question I was asking about the Alberta investor tax credit, do you have a sense of what your projected revenue to the government will be based on a fully subscribed tax credit?
I'm going to get Toby up to talk about it because he has those numbers. But what I can tell you, my officials just confirmed that the digital media tax credit is trade compliant. There is not an issue whatsoever, and no one from the U.S. or the NAFTA tables have raised it as a concern.
Okay, thanks.
So Toby,
Appreciate
can you come
that.
up and talk a little bit about this?
Just briefly, it's a great question. When we look at a tax credit like that, we have the primary effects and then we have the secondary effects. So I'll focus first on the primary effects. So the primary effects, we would have the activity that happens, and then we'd have a tax base that's built both through the personal income tax system and the corporate income tax system. Now on the personal side, because as Minister mentioned, we have more graduates in the system than we have people. We know we have people leaving the province at the current time. So I think it is fair to say that we do see some incrementality in the income tax system on the personal side because we're not just displacing people from other jobs. In that case, we see that roughly around 40 to 45% of the tax credit costs would come back through the income tax system because these are good paying jobs and there would be variability around that, but that's our estimate. On the corporate income tax side, of course, it's more difficult because it all depends on profitability. So looking at the kind of average profitability, it could range, well, obviously, if there's really no good games that come out of Alberta, there's not going to be a lot of profits. But when we look overall with the sector, we actually see that there's a pretty good profitability and we see a very high reinvestment rate. And so that tells us that there's good profitability. There's 13% estimated global growth in the sector year over year expected this year. So you can see there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of money being reinvested. So it's always very difficult and actually quite a bit of folly to try to forecast corporate income tax, specifically around companies. But we see that a good portion of the remainder of that would likely come back at corporate income tax base over a long period of time. It takes quite a while to build up a corporate income tax base. The last thing I'll say is that when we go beyond the sector and the direct effect, we also know that there's a lot of incenting effects because these are very, very high knowledge workers. And so it actually tends to grow the technology sectors beyond that, what's not possible today, and we haven't accounted for those.
Apologize to interrupt.